Hello and welcome to our viewers in Nigeria and around the world. I am Imoni Amarere. In the last 2 weeks, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has been holding consultations and sensitizing critical stakeholders on its proposal to create more polling units across the country. And this is ahead of the 2023 general elections. According to the Electoral Management Body, the aim of the exercise is to expand access to polling units for voters. As of today, there are 119,973 polling units in Nigeria, which were created as far back as 1996. That is 25 years ago, by the defunct National Electoral Commission of Nigeria, NECON. The existing 119,973 polling units were projected to serve about 50 million registered voters. Now, whereas the Nigerian population has grown in geometric proportions since then, just as the number of registered voters have increased to over 84 million as at the 2019 elections, the number of polling units have remained static. INEC says the lack of correlation between the number of registered voters and the number of polling units has resulted in congestions of available polling units on election days, especially in developing suburban and newly established settlements. INEC's proposed increase of polling units is therefore aimed at addressing the challenges posed to election management by the current inadequacy of polling units for a burgeoning voter population. And one of such challenges identified by the Electoral Commission is low voter turnout, put at between 30 and 35% for every election, of course occasioned by poor or lack of access to voting points. INEC says its plan is to convert existing polling points into full-fledged polling units and relocate polling units located in private premises and other such places to public places and institutions. Although the Commission is empowered by the provisions of Section 42 of the Electoral Act to carry out these exercises, it has been unable to do so for 25 years and has now decided to consult and sensitize before doing so. The big question is, why? What should and would be the criteria for the creation of the new polling units? How accessible, how secure, and how conducive will they be for voters? And what is the guarantee that they will not be influenced or interfered with by political considerations? There are already reports of politicians making demands on the electoral body to create new polling units in their constituencies. What must the Commission do to make this exercise a credible and a transparent one? A second related issue, which we intend to look at if time permits, is the proposal by political parties under the auspices of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC, for all elections to be conducted in one day, so as, according to them, to save cost and time. Now, how feasible is this proposal? Now, join our conversation after this timeout. Thank you so much for staying with us. Just before we get to meet our guest in the studio, let's inform you that anytime from now, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is set to become the first female and first African leader of the World Trade Organization. As we speak, the World Trade Organization is meeting, and hopefully very soon, she being the only candidate, would then assume the position of the Director General of the WTO. We will bring updates on that to you as we move ahead. All right, time now to go into our discussion, and I'm joined in the studio by McDonald Ikemezie. Mr. Ikemezie is a communications and program manager of the Center for Transparency Advocacy, CTA. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ikemezie. Also joining us is a familiar face on this channel, Igo Akerega. Igo is the president, Civil Liberties Organization, CLO. He is a member of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, and he's also the bureau chief of the Guardian newspaper right here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Igo, thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
So, McDonald, let's begin this way. How critical is voter access to polling stations, to a credible electoral process, and by extension, a good democracy?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, viewers. Voter access to polling units, first and foremost, gives the right of a citizen to vote. Now, if as a citizen you do not have access, that means you have been deprived, and it becomes a challenge, because at the end of the day, your vote did not count because you did not vote. It's critical, and for our democracy to thrive, to continue to move in a credible direction, voter access is important. The voter has to have a pleasant experience while going to vote. It shouldn't be something that has to be with difficulties. It's something that you leave your home, you, like a jolly fellow, you just walk down to the nearest polling unit to your house or to your wherever your residence, cast your vote in less than 20, 30, 40 minutes. You go home or you wait and for the result. But let it not be something that has to be so difficult to do. What I'm saying is that I am agreeing with the position of that INEC is taking to expand voter access, because it is important, it is critical. That is when you begin to examine and to see the credibility of what the outcome of an election would be. If a voter is satisfied, then whatever the outcome is, it leads to the credibility of such election, and then we can now begin to shout hallelujah that our democracy is taking deep roots.
Igo, we've seen situations in the past, even in the immediate past in 2019, where there were large crowds of people at polling units. Now, these polling units, as designed by the electoral management body, are not supposed to hold more than 500 people per voting point. But we've seen situations like the picture we saw earlier on of large crowds of people all wanting to access a polling unit. Now, what then is the relationship between access to polling units or polling stations and the credibility of the exercise that follows?
I think fundamentally, lack of access to polling units have resulted in very low voter turnout and apathy in the electoral system. To this extent, the Independent National Electoral Commission basically has taken the right steps. Prior to 2016, from what you have said, really, prior to 2016, we all saw what happened. Nigeria remains static at 119,973. Yeah, 973.
Even up to 2019.
Yes, 2019 general elections. But if you compare that to a smaller country like Ghana, that has a population of about almost like 33 million, and they have 33,000 polling units. So, if you look at the aggregate to the population of the country, you could see that voter access is almost very guaranteed in that country. That's exactly what...
and of course, the number of registered voters will not be half the number of, or maybe 2/3 of the number
exactly,
of the
right.
population.
Exactly.
So we might just be looking at, say, maybe 22 million out of the 34 million.
Exactly. I know even if you look at 22 million, not all will also turn out on election day. So you find that the election management system in Ghana is far better than what we have here. Not because INEC has not done enough, but also because of all the arguments forth and back as against why INEC want to establish, polling units. I think the time is just ripe for the Independent Electoral Election Commission to indeed establish more polling units and create voter access. I think when that is done, if you look at what happened in, I think the 2019 general election, 2011 general election, that was when INEC even created polling points, voting points, to just augment. The voting points was not official because the polling units were official, but the voting points was just to minimize the crowd that we saw even in that video, where you have voting units, polling units that have more than 750 voters. So INEC has taken the right step this time, and I think every Nigerian should support this. The politics around whether INEC wants to favor a particular geopolitical, I think that is just not it. If you look at the geometric rise in our population as against the current numbers of polling units we have, it is just not tenable at all. It is, and by 2023, when we shall be having the next general election, of course the population would have risen, and there will be more overcrowding at the voting points. So if we do not take care of it now, there will also be more voter apathy, and that's going to clearly affect our electoral management system. So Professor Mahmoud Jega is right on course this time around too. As he embarks on consultations across, we just hope that everybody is in sync to agree that there's actually a need to carry more Nigerians along, to create more plurality in our voting system.
How does this really affect voter turnout and the apathy that you talk about? Because some people will argue anyone who really wants to vote will want to go out there and vote against all odds. But
yeah, basically what happens, you find long queues. Yeah, voting is supposed to start sometimes from about 9 o'clock, where you have to do accreditation and all of that. Now, if you have more voting points, the number of people at a queue at a voting polling unit will be reduced, and the voting time will also be reduced. When people realize that if you get to a voting point, you are not going to spend more than 1 hour or maximum 2 hours, more people are likely going to turn out to cast their votes. And by so doing, they will be exercising their citizen franchise to participate in the electoral process. But if you realize that by the time you wake up from your house at about 7 o'clock, get to a voting point, and you queue there, for a very long time, and even the card reader also, a couple of times the card reader has also disappointed. But if you now have more voting points, you are going to have a more efficient system, such that people will now know that they can almost calculate their time. They say, okay, if I get to a voting point, maximum 2 hours, it will get to my turn, I'll cast my vote and then leave. So it's going to encourage more voter participation, and the outcome, I'm sure, will be more credible. Because people will now realize that at least I voted, I exercised my franchise. At a particular voting point, people will also know where the vote went. So if the result is eventually declared and it tallies with their expectation, a lot of people, there will be voter interest in future elections.
McDonald, let's look at the Electoral Act, as it were. Electoral Act Section 42 actually empowers the Electoral Commission to create these polling units. But since 1996, 25 long years, the Electoral Commission has been unable to create any polling units. Instead, like Iwo said, what they have done is at some point create voting points. Why not create these polling units? What is the inhibition? Why not create these polling units? Why resort to creating voting points? What's the difference between the two?
Okay, polling units specifically are products of law, whereas voting points are as you said, just a creation to ease the crowd and to make things easier for INEC and for voters. Now, when we look at the Electoral Act and the authority that INEC has to create those things, to create polling units, we may also have to resort and go back to the National Assembly. Even the Electoral Act, the 2010 was amended, and specifically, the National Assembly has to speed up the current Electoral Act. That I am sure INEC has about 15 items that they would like to, change, they would like to see. Now, if that is done, and a specific mandate is given to INEC to create polling units, now people will now see it as, okay, this is what the law says, and INEC is doing that. But if INEC goes out on its own to begin to create polling units without the mandate of the law, now that's when people will now start saying, okay, maybe they are doing this to favor a section or some friends. And again, it will also become a situation where politicians might want to hijack it, where they begin to see it as part of a constituency project. And I'm sure this is what INEC also would like to avoid. And specifically, INEC is consulting the civil society, the entire on the electoral value chain, so that what comes out at the end of the day, it's a mandate, not only by law, but also something that is also approved by the people. So that is the reason INEC has to think twice before going into that, so that it doesn't go with a lot of controversies, and at the end of the day, people will be looking at it as something that is not backed by law.
Igor, the subsisting Electoral Act, the provisions of that Act 42 actually empowers the Commission to create these polling units. Why does it need to sensitize or consult a broad spectrum of what those they call critical stakeholders before doing his job according to the law?
Yeah, you have seen that since the creation of INEC, it has moved through stages from NECON to NEC and all of that up to INEC now. We as Nigerians, we have seen that the Commission itself has been dogged by all kinds of controversies. Most times, these controversies are needless. All right, so it is within the powers of the INEC chairman and INEC itself to actually just go ahead and create the polling units once the law exists. But we have also seen the effort in the past when the INEC itself decided to create the polling units, and we saw the criticism, coming from across the country. I think INEC learned from that, and that was why it has decided at this time, to then engage in these consultations. I also saw communication coming from INEC. I read a lot of the communication coming from INEC that while they are embarking on this exercise, they are also going to clean up the entire system, move polling units from shrines, from homes of powerful politicians, from certain places where political leaders and influencers of the political system appear to have access. Now they will put this, they will establish the polling units in neutral areas such that every Nigerian can have equal access. Because if you put a polling unit in the compound of a politician, for example, it's likely going to dictate the outcome. And it is these individuals, I suspect, that in the past have raised their voices against INEC once INEC is trying to embark on a project that is targeted at, giving access to the mass of the people to exercise their franchise to vote. But I also think that at this point, the Commission itself must not begin to bow to all the sentiments that people express. What is important is to follow the dictates and the provisions of the Constitution, and then the Section 4 that empowers the Commission to create these polling units. It is overall very good for the Commission to consult so that everybody can be in sync, will be on board what they want to do. And once there is a buy-in by all the critical stakeholders, then I'm sure that the criticisms will be mitigated.
If that does not happen, what should the commission do if there isn't a complete buy-in by all?
Yeah, well, one should not also be expecting 100%, but I have a civil society background as president of the CLO, for example. I'm aware that INEC is consulting with civil society, consulting with the media, with the political parties, and all stakeholders. Now, anybody at this point who does not agree with INEC must have to give very valid and legitimate reason why we are disagreeing that more polling units should not be created. I'm sure that every Nigerian will want easy access to polling units, cast their votes quickly, and then leave so that they can also rest and await the outcome of the election. That's what everybody wants at this point, and not a cumbersome process where everybody had to stay under the sun and sometimes under the rain. You see old people, aged people having to stay in the queue to queue, before they cast their vote. That is what the commission is seeking to mitigate, and I think everybody should support this
Before
process.
we come to the issue of the criteria that will be used in creating these polling units, McDonald, let's look at an issue we just raised now. INEC intends to move some existing polling units from private residences, from shrines, from all manner of places, and put them in the public space where everyone can easily access. We know for certain that some of these private places have been used in the past to manipulate the process and all of that. But these public places are also places that may not have all the facilities that you require for a very conducive environment for the conduct of elections. For instance, some of these schools do not have electricity. Some of them do not have toilets. Some of them do not have the kind of security that you require, maybe a fenced environment and all of that. How does INEC go about doing this and doing it in such a way that everybody will have faith in the fact that this polling station has been moved from this shrine to a primary school, a secondary school, or even a fire station, as is done in most other democratic climes, elsewhere around the world. Fire stations, even in some cases, police stations are used as polling units.
Well, some polling units go to private places. In some states, when some states were created, some of those big men donated their buildings as either ministries or some for public use, and they were declared as public properties at that time, and polling units or voting centers were established there. Now INEC wants to move them. You asked, a very important question. Will those public places have the conveniences for a pleasant voter experience? What INEC needs to do at this point in time is to critically begin to talk to the providers of such public places. For instance, state governments, local governments, authorities, even to community authorities. There are communities that have town halls. Those town halls are public spaces. They can provide those conveniences. Well, let me not just jump into the criteria. I also think that before polling units are established in some of the areas that are requesting for it, those should be the things that INEC should point out. One, you have to provide conveniences, you have to provide electricity. INEC does not need to hire any type of generator, whether I pass my neighbor or any kind, to be able to recharge their equipment. So the government at the state level, they own most of those schools or most of those public spaces. They should be able to provide electricity, provide furniture, provide toilets, and even for challenges that people with disability will have, especially those who may need to come with wheelchairs. They need to, make those public buildings accessible to all manners of Nigerians who would want to vote. So INEC should engage the government at all levels and community leaders at all levels, so that by the time you're now saying, look, I want to pull these things out of the shrines, I want to pull them out of private spaces, your public space has to have convenience. It has to be, the provisions have to be there for people to have access, for bona fide voters to have access, to be able to cast their votes and be sure they've casted their votes.
Now, the other related matter has to do with the fact that I was reading up some literature on this before coming on air, and it surprised me that a place like the Gwarimpa, which is regarded as the biggest housing estate in West Africa, with such a huge population of people, has only 4 polling units. And I imagine the number of registered voters who reside in a place like that. And it's just one of so many other places across the country. We have places like Lagos, Ibadan, where the population, Kano, mention it, Sokoto, where the population has increased significantly. Between when the projection was for 50 million voters to 2019, when there was over 84 million voters. Now, but INEC is saying that perhaps one of the reasons why the voter turnout is always low, that's ranged between 30 and 35%, year in, year out, one election after another, is possibly because people feel discouraged that they will have to drive or walk long distances to get to polling units. Now, what do you think should be the criteria employed by INEC this time around to create these new polling units, to bring it nearer to the voter and make it more pleasant an experience for them to go vote?
Now, that is a very good question. I think that is a typical challenge that the Commission is facing at this time. The challenge of, one, having to cater for huge numbers of people, and McDonald talked about conveniences while he was commenting earlier. And so for me, really, basically, it's a typical challenge. And INEC has rightly identified that as one of the key issues it is going to tackle. I saw a video recently of where, I think somewhere in Abuja, here in Papi or somewhere, where people were, or somewhere in Nasarawa, between Abuja and Nasarawa, during the last election, where people were climbing the fence, you know, forcing.
In Karo here.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know,
Karo
that
side.
shows that Nigerians are willing to exercise their franchise. It is just the access, you know. So that is why earlier I said that it is not incumbent. It is an idea whose time has come for the Commission to actually create more polling units. And so a place like Gwarimpa, as you mentioned, Gwarimpa can't have a population of less than about 2 million or so. It's a massive estate if you get to that place, with just 4 polling units. So you can imagine how, I'm sure one of the polling units should have more than 2,000 to 3,000 people willing to vote. And there's no way any INEC official can deal with that kind of crowd. So it is very appropriate at this time that we should, the INEC should actually set up those polling units. Then on the issue of criteria, really, because I think that is where the fear of most people are, you know, such that if you create polling units, more polling units in a particular area, you do not come out at the end to say, because there are more polling units, you had more voters who participated, and therefore the outcome of the election will now reflect, you know, the total number of people who voted in those polling. That is the fear. So maybe I will be appealing to INEC to ensure that they study demographics very well, whether it has to do with women, people with disability, the different regions, the states, the local government. Currently we have 774 local governments, 36 states, including the FCT, which makes it 37 overall. So I'm sure for INEC, from these consultations that the Commission is engaging in now, the feedback itself that it is going to get will guide it in establishing the new polling units, such that it will be devoid of criticisms, of rancor, or any kind of condemnation. Everybody will be carried along in why certain numbers of polling units are established in particular places. I'm sure that INEC has a job to do.
Should INEC be looking at the voters register and using that as a decider to say we are establishing 2 more polling units on Kwaduma Hill, for instance, where we are now, and 2 more polling units in Wuse 2, for instance? Should it be looking at its own, like Hugo said, demographics, or should it be looking at the voters register and say, look, we have more voters registered in this place, and therefore we require more polling units here than we are here, and not simply on the basis of overall population of the people, because you may have such a large population but not have the large number of registered voters.
Okay, for INEC to look at the voters register, the voter register fine could give them an inkling of what the population is. But again, I think they should also look at more of projected voters. For instance, the number of people who have registered in a particular area, some may have moved out. So if you establish or create new polling units just on the basis of that, they might get it wrong. Population is key, is vital, as Hugo said. They have to look at the demography, they have to look at the people, the size of the area, as we are using Gwarimpa, for instance. I've also gone to some areas of Pape. The population there too is huge, it's massive. So they have to look at it, now compare it to what they have in their register, and also project that in the next 3 months, if they start the new continuous voter registration exercise, how many people are we likely to have? So I think in this instance, they need to get experts, especially demographers and statisticians, to help. So they will not basically, I do not advocate that they should basically use the voter register. They have to look at the population. They have to also project that in the next 3 months, in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years, so amount of people may have gotten to voting age, and they will also register. And so I think that's something they need to look at.
In some rural communities, people have to trek, have to walk several kilometers, in some cases up to 10 kilometers, to get to any available polling unit at all. Just as they do when they have to look for healthcare services, have to walk or ride on the Okada or on bikes, on keke napep and whatever, all manner of very inconveniencing means of transportation to get to hospitals and all of that. It is the same in most rural areas on polling day. In situations like that, what should INEC be doing? Okay,
this is important. Being a person who have lived and worked in the creeks for years, it's a serious challenge. INEC should establish or should create polling units closer to the people, irrespective of the distance. It is not encouraging for somebody to trek for 3-4 kilometers just to cast a vote and go back. So it is now INEC going to the people and not people coming to INEC. INEC should take polling units closer to the people. There are places that people need to use a boat to row, or need to use the speedboat to get to, no, this shouldn't be. So this should be part of the thing INEC should be looking at. Even for those, I have been to Idore in Ondo State. There are people who still live up the hills. I took a walk on that hill, and it takes you almost 3-4 hours to climb and come down. And those people will have to come down to come and vote. You know? So once you look at, study the number of people who are living there, they're also voters. They're also Nigerians. They also have the right to cast their vote. So you take a polling unit to such places, and so that people can exercise their franchise.
Okay, there are indications, very strong indications, that politicians are already making overtures to the Independent National Electoral Commission. In fact, there are stories of politicians who have already applied to the commission to create polling units in their various constituencies. How can the commission avoid being influenced by politicians or political considerations in the creation of these polling units? We'll talk about that when we... All right, thank you so much for staying with us. McDonald Ekemeze and Igor Akerega, my guest on the program today. Yeah, so Igor, let's talk about possible political interference or influence by politicians in the creation of this. Because as we know today, I understand that there are over 5,000 applications or requests, let's put it that way, by politicians to the Electoral Commission alone, which to me means an attempt to press the commission, to pressure the commission into creating these polling units for whatever considerations, for whatever conveniences these politicians feel. It talked about some politicians seeing these as constituency projects, something they would take back and brag about when they get home to say, yes, I was responsible for bringing these number of polling units to this constituency. How does an independent body like INEC go about this without having to succumb to these pressures?
Well, the beauty of all this is that the commission itself is very independent, and Professor Mahmoud Jega has proven over time that he has the capacity to deal with a lot of these issues. Don't forget, prior to the 2019 general elections, the INEC chairman also came under a lot of pressures, to do all kinds of things, But so far, I think, in my opinion, that he has acquitted himself well, and that was why he got a second term. So he has a big challenge in his hands to ensure that the credibility that he has built for himself over time, that he sustains it. He must be able to resist these politicians. What should be paramount, in the minds of INEC, and particularly the INEC chairman, is to ensure that he considers one critical factor, that is population and voter mobility. What I mean by population and voter mobility has to do with not just relying on the voter register alone, because a lot of people have moved from their previous places of residences, either voluntarily or involuntarily. We have seen that in parts of the country, there have been all kinds of crises. So people have also moved as a result of those crises. Now, what should happen is for INEC too, I just hope that the revised electoral bill is, we agree on all the components of that law, so that the president can assent to it, and we can have a clean law, such that INEC itself will then have the enabling legal capacity to do its job. One, I think that INEC should establish offices in the 774 local government, because every day we have people moving into the voting bracket, celebrating their birthdays, and then maybe from 17 you now move into the 18-year bracket that qualifies you, to be a voting adult. So such individuals can just walk up to a local government, for example, and say, oh, I'm not 18 years, show proof of your age. And then you can update, you can then move into, the voter register. That way, it is going to encourage more voter participation. Now, for the politicians who are hoping, to benefit from this process, I'm sure they'll be disappointed, because once the commission itself try to build technology into its operations, such that as you are voting, the results are being transmitted and things like that. Even if the thing is in your bedroom and people come, if there's multiple thumb printing, for example, technology can just reveal it, that somebody has embarked on multiple thumb printing in so polling unit, so area, and that can be captured. And INEC has the powers to cancel such elections or invalidate it and conduct fresh elections. So I hope our politicians will come out of this cocoon where they pursue what is paramount to them, is to pursue selfish interests, to ensure that they dominate the electoral process to their own personal benefit, instead of allowing the process to be neutral, to be beneficial to all that have come out to vote. And that is what INEC should be pursuing in future elections moving forward. So I also think that maybe I should make this point. You know, the INEC should ignore the over 5,000 requests that is coming from our politicians. It is not embedded in the interest of the public, but in its selfish interest, you know, except if the commission itself, on the basis of their own investigation and interrogating the issues, find that it is necessary to establish such police station. It shouldn't be that because he's a senator or a governor or a House of Reps member or a local government chairman wants a polling unit in a place, the INEC will go and establish it.
Igor, I think you meant the current INEC chairman, Mahmoud Yakubu, and not Jega.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Mahmoud Yakubu. All right. McDonald, yes. What exactly do you think of this request by politicians and the possibility of the commission being influenced?
I should think that requests should come mostly from communities and not from politicians. We will also agree that
the communities are likely to be propelled by the politicians.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But there are communities, if proper consultations are made and the communities, you know, the president generals or those who are leaders in those communities, I agree some politicians are equally leaders, should come out with what they think and not the politicians themselves. Now, can INEC be influenced? As Igor said, the present management, you know, the team I see in INEC, I doubt if, from the top, if they will be influenced. But again, we do not know maybe certain things that might be happening within the local communities and the local governments where you also have some staff. But the key thing here is credibility. If INEC wants to get it right, they should be able to resist the pressure by politicians for whatever things they list they bring. As Igor also said, they should investigate it and find out if it is worthy or if it is not worthy. But I should think seriously that communities, the president generals, the town unions should be able to present their cases and not politicians, even though they may be influenced. But hopefully the community leaders, they don't belong to the same political parties. They might not necessarily agree with the politicians. They have their own different views. So by the time the entire community come together and decide, I think that it's a better way to go about it, and that's the best way to look at it. And I also say and stand by it and say INEC should be committed to it and should not by any means be influenced by politicians.
That takes us to the next issue, Igor. Now, the scope of consultations and sensitization that is ongoing at the moment, do you think it is robust enough, it's wide enough to enable INEC really get a feel of what it wants to do? Because it was, we are talking, INEC is talking with the media, civil society, socio-cultural organizations, what else? The security
rulers,
agencies, traditional rulers. Should they go further down than that level to much more basic level to begin to get a feel of, because these polling units are the grassroots?
Yes, that is a good question, but I think that there is no amount of consultation that can get to everybody. What INEC is doing basically is to target the critical stakeholders. And these groups actually represent the diversity of society itself. Whether we are talking about security agencies, the mass media, you know, which are the purveyors of information, and of course, traditional rulers, actors and actresses, all manners of professional groups. I think INEC has designed its communication strategy well enough to target these critical stakeholders. That can also, information getting to these stakeholders can permeate the entire strata down to the grassroots that we talk about. Because that is not the only job that INEC has to do. Consulting on the creation of this, but they have so many other responsibilities of the commission. But this is for me, this is a laudable effort on the part of the commission. They can also ignore all the criticisms and just go ahead and create the polling units. The commission will be acting within the enabling law that empowers it to so do. So it is actually, because it is a people-oriented commission, the election itself is for the people, it's for Nigerians. So their own input is very important, and that is why I think INEC is embarking on this. So okay. I do not think that it can go out consulting everybody before it can create. With the next 3 years will not even be enough to begin to consult everybody.
No, that's another question.
Yes, but I think there is another a critical sector. I am not sure if that consultation captures students. From
NANS and all that.
Yes, I am not sure it actually captured students. They're also critical voters. Some of them will now become corpers who will eventually be engaged by INEC to do some of the ad hoc jobs. So I think if they have not done so, they should also try as much as possible to get students involved. Then,
and there are also situations when elections actually take place when students are on campus.
On campus, yes.
Schools are in session.
Yes, so university communities are critical communities. You know, those students, they make up a large number of even our voters and the ad hoc staff eventually. Then, yes, if they are talking to socio-cultural organizations, we tend to admit that those socio-cultural organizations represent the grassroots. But sometimes it does not work that way. The grassroots, INEC should also go further. Engage town unions, no matter how they do it. They are recs in different local government, in different states, and there are representatives in local government area. Those ones can also go down, you know, to talk to the community leaders. What do you want? And not just talking to the big organizations and they come to Abuja and talk and go. No. So I am advocating that INEC should engage these other two critical sectors.
Igor, there's one other thing very quickly that we just need to look at. There's a situation where in countries, in Ghana for instance, where people who are engaged in election day activities, such as journalists, the military, the medical doctors or what have you, are allowed to vote a few days before election. But here we don't do so. And in the end, because you are on the field on election day, you cannot even exercise your franchise. You are deprived of your voting rights.
Yeah, if you look at even the US itself, you can see that technology drives most of their voting process, such that even a month to that time, to the day of voting, people are already voting. You can
early voting,
early voters,
yes.
And all of that. That is something that INEC. So INEC can look at. It's an important point that you raised there. That is something that the commission can look at, you know, for the purposes of also ensuring that it captures everybody in the voting net, you know. I should also say here that beyond trying to capture everyone, you look at what even the political parties are also arguing now, that all the elections should take place in one day. You know, that is going to compound. Yes, it would have been good if we have the critical logistics, you know, to be able to do that. And that will involve wholesome deployment of technology, because countries where elections hold in the same day, you know, you can just stay in your house and even vote without coming out. And that is where the issue of national ID, all kinds of things, data and all of that comes in. Here we are still struggling with the basics.
I believe that is a full topic for another discussion we need to look at.
Absolutely.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
Mark
Donald Ekemeze is the Communications Program Manager of the Center for Transparency Advocacy, CTA. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Igor Akerega is the President, Civil Liberties Organization, CLO, and member Nigerian Guild of Editors. He is also the Bureau Chief of the Guardian newspaper here in the nation's capital, Abuja. He's wearing 3 huge caps.
Very big
Thank
caps.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank
That's
you.
our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.